Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with the midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And then, of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. And there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so you can just watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you feel ready. We're going to start with this little piece from CNN, and while it does have a video, I'm not going to play it. You can grab the link below in the description, but most likely just to highlight that a new study funded by the NIH shows that use of cannabis and hallucinogens among young adults is at all-time highs. Now imagine this is the first time they're actually, surveying young adults to find out how much they're using cannabis and hallucinogens as well. So this is likely the first time we're seeing that it's at an all-time high because they're actually checking for the first time. But also, it seems like 100,000 people died from opioids last year, unfortunately. And so there's clearly a reason why people would be looking for safer, non-addictive medicinal alternatives that actually work at solving the root problem as opposed to just masking the effects and being another band-aid. And so wanted to share what is actually good news out of this, although CNN does not highlight it as a good thing. This comes as, for the first time ever, more people say they use weed more than tobacco cigarettes, which anyone in their right mind can actually argue is a good thing, because if more people are turning away from tobacco cigarettes filled with harmful chemicals that have mountains of data that prove over time with consistent use can increase your risk of lung cancer and obviously causes a lot of lung cancer, versus cannabis, where there is no data to prove that, despite how counterintuitive it seems, because you're also inhaling and smoking. The fact is that less people smoking tobacco and more people smoking cannabis likely means less people dying from cancer in the long run. And I'd say that's a good thing, especially since CNN does not have any data to back up that cannabis is actually harmful for you. All they can do is come at you with their propaganda angle and try and make you afraid and try and spark with your emotions. So I'm not going to play the video. You can grab the link below, but a little rant over there as we move on to some more news. As Business Wire shares ETFMG's MJ Cannabis ETF to include multi-state operators. Addition to multi-state operators to MJ ETF offers investors exposure to global cannabis industry. And so my main question is, why now do they think it's the right time to get exposure to MSOs? So ETF Managers Group LLC, a leading thematic ETF issuer, announced today that ETFMG Alternative Harvest ETF and NYSE ARCA MJ, the world's first cannabis ETF, will complete its global portfolio by offering exposure to cannabis companies operating in the United States, which include multi-state operators directly involved in the cultivation, production, marketing, and distribution of cannabis or cannabis-related products. And so again, why now as opposed to 6 months ago or a year ago? Obviously, do they know something we don't, or do they see less risk going forward? Adding with bipartisan support for federal cannabis reform at an all-time high, and with key senators open to supporting moderate reform measures separate from legislation that provides comprehensive federal legalization. So reading between the lines, that screams safe. Plus, we believed now was the right time to add exposure to plant-touching U.S. companies. And so a little bit more on what they expect for the global cannabis market from now until 2026 as well. And so you can pause to read, but just wanted to share that as it was interesting, just the timing to highlight, as well as this one comes from realmoney.thestreet.com. Dougie Cass, who is a large hedge fund manager, he's been bullish, then he's been bearish. And he's been bearish for the most part since the last time he was bullish, but he is sharing, Dougie Cass again coming back, getting a little bullish because he can't help himself. 10 reasons why I plan to substantially increase my cannabis holdings. It seems to me that federal legislation is inevitable. So again, legislation, not legalization. And so unfortunately, it seems like I've reached the limit, but good thing for me is that this sneaky little trick down here, open an incognito window and I can pull up the rest. And so just to add that he plans to substantially raise his cannabis holdings in the days ahead. And so I'm going to let you just read from 1 to 7. So you can pause to read the reasons from 1 to 7. Well, I will read 8, 9, and 10 because they feature some of the most recent developments that I just reported on within the last week. And so obviously a lot of these things are building momentum towards some sort of potential incremental reform. And so pause to read from 1 to 7. And then lastly, we've got number 8. According to my calculus, this is Dougie Cass's, and at current levels, the upside reward is compelling and dwarfs the downside risk from this current point. Number 9, as previously noted, a naked shorting ban in Canada listed stocks was instituted last week, which we love to see. Well, number 10, ETFMG, as I just featured, the new ETFMG will be including U.S. MSOs starting next week. And so his holdings include AdvisorShares U.S. Cannabis ETF, MSOS, Cresco Labs, Trulieve, Green Thumb Industries, Verano, Air Wellness, TerrAscend Corp, and Tilray. And so again, this is not advice, just the opinion of a hedge fund manager with a lot more experience than I do, but just wanted to share this with you as we move back. And so that link as well could be below if you wanted to grab it and read through it. And so more news though, Cannabis Moment reports that Missouri officials begin planning for cannabis legalization now that reform is on the ballot. So we love to hear this, as Missouri is one of the bigger states that we really want want to make sure that they at least get legalization on the ballot and vote for it, along with Maryland. So the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services, DHSS, said in an announcement on Thursday that if voters approve the cannabis reform measure in November, it will require the department to quickly make adjustments to the existing medical cannabis program and implement a new adult consumer program. Because of this, the department will begin planning now for those potential changes, it said. And so little to report now, just besides the fact that they're planning on starting to make this happen, but nonetheless, just wanted to scroll down and show you, here's what Legal Missouri's 2022's reform initiatives would accomplish. And so if you want to learn more about Missouri, you can pause to read this snippet down here, or you can grab the link below. Well, as we move on, just happy to share that the Missouri market is growing and things are heading in the right direction. As Springfield News Leader reports, in 2021, more Missourians applied for medical cannabis cards and got them. So that's obviously a positive note, as more Missourians are getting access to a safer, non-addictive alternative that might not kill them. And so since 2020, more Missourians have applied for medical cannabis licenses and more have been receiving them, according to the annual report from the Missouri Medical Cannabis Regulatory Program. In 2021, 119,894 patient licenses were issued. Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services published its third annual report on Tuesday, and in 2021, there was $190 million of cumulative retail sales, more than $6 million in taxes were deposited into the Missouri Veterans Health and Care Fund, and more than $6.8 million was transferred to the Missouri Veterans Commission. So again, another benefit of ending cannabis prohibition and reforming your laws, you've got cash directly going to veterans and those that need it the most. Well, the report also looked at who holds medical cannabis cards and where they're at, as 31% of all patients reside in the urban areas of St. Louis, Jackson, and Greene counties, while the majority of patients, 85.5%, have access to at least one dispensary in their county, which is positive, leaving 15% of patients in a county without a dispensary, which is not ideal because that just increases the odds that these 15% will turn to the black market because it's cheaper and they don't have to drive as far, which also creates the incentive to open new dispensaries where they're located so that 100% of your patients have access to legal cannabis products as opposed to turning to the black market and making organized crime stronger. And so lastly, just a bit more stats on more patients are applying for and receiving medical cannabis cards, and so who's actually getting them and how much these numbers are going up, so you can pause to read. Well, there's a bit more down here as well if you wanted to pause to read. And then mostly just wanted to highlight as well the benefits of ending cannabis prohibition. More businesses, more licenses, more jobs, more tax dollars, and more potential positives for everyone in the state of Missouri. Even Missouri, as price increase for licenses, they can even make a little bit more money when everyone is making a bit of money. And so obviously the benefits of ending cannabis prohibition speak for themselves. And so on to this one from MJ Biz Daily. Midyear state cannabis sales, a mixed bag across the U.S. So just wanted to recap some highlights from here. Midyear cannabis sales, a review of cannabis sales through July show emerging markets growing while mature medical and recreational programs experience some contractions. It's worth noting that New Jersey, the most recent state to legalize with a population of 8 million, so that's going to be a strong driver of sales, is not even featured on here whatsoever. So worth noting that. While we do have growth markets emerging still, Illinois, Arizona, Michigan, Iowa for medical, Utah for medical, Missouri for medical, and then I believe that is Maine for recreational as well. And so obviously some of the more mature markets are seeing less growth, especially the medical ones that don't have the ability to launch for adult use and see that spike. But nonetheless, this was expected. But that is the benefit and why we love that there are 50 states in the U.S. So as more states reform their laws, no matter what, organically the total addressable market will expand. And there is an incentive for them to reform their laws because it is the right thing to do. And obviously it brings a lot more benefits than not. And so just to read through it a little bit, U.S. cannabis sales through July were a mixed bag across the country as consumers adjusted to historic inflation and shrinking disposable income, according to an analysis of state sales by MJ Biz Daily. Newer rec and medical markets pose the kind of double-digit growth expected from emerging cannabis markets as well. And so markets experiencing growth through the first 7 months of this year include Missouri medical 174%, Maine recreational 159%, Utah 87% for medical, Arizona rec sales through May 64%, Iowa medical 63%, Michigan rec 57%, and then Illinois rec 20%. So keep in mind this is without the extra 185 stores that will hopefully come on in the new year. And so by contrast, more mature markets like California, Colorado, and Oregon contracted, some declining 20% or more compared to the first 6 months of 2021. But still, they're doing monster numbers already, so a lot of growth for the emerging markets to catch up and pick up on. And so medical markets that posted falling sales during the first of the year compared to the same period as last year, showing Colorado medical sales are down by 42.8%, Michigan's are down by 41.3%, Oregon's are down by 37.7%, Arizona's by 16.5%, Massachusetts down by 10.3%, and then Illinois by 10.4%. And so this does make me wonder how much of a role Croptober does play in these, because obviously if you don't have a lot of money to start with, you're going to go to the illicit source versus the legal source if the cannabis product that you're buying does have the, the medical remedies that you're sort of looking for. But at the same time, it's worth noting that none of these markets are medical only. These are markets that have launched for recreational cannabis as well. And that is a trend that we do see when you don't have to go to the doctor and you can go to a recreational shop and get the same cannabis that has the same positive medicinal effects that you're looking for. You'll just skip going to the doctor and you'll just go to the legal store. And so that is why we sort of hope that the legal sales do offset the drop that we see in medical sales. And so last thing, there's a lot in this article. If you wanted to grab and read it, it is interesting, but they do put all of the sales in one place for you. So recreational cannabis sales by state, you can pause to read for the most up-to-date, most of them from July, except for Arizona. This sales data is only from May, I believe. And then we've got medical cannabis sales by state, most of them from July, Colorado from June, and then Arizona from May. So you can pause to read as well, just to see how sales are chugging along in states. While we move on to this one from MJ Biz Daily, Virginia cannabis firms expand medical facilities amid uncertainty over adult use sales. And I want to show this, or use this as a case study to highlight what happens when you decriminalize only and you don't launch an adult use program sooner than later. And so cannabis multi-state operators in Virginia are focused on building out their medical cannabis facilities while they wait to see whether the Commonwealth's adult use program actually launches in 2024 as planned, now that Republicans control much of the state government. So, in the meantime, representatives from Florida-based Jushi Holdings and New York-headquartered Columbia Care, which have medical cannabis licenses in Virginia, say they're focused on opening their 6 total dispensaries allowed under the state. And so basically, long story short, they're not holding their breath and expecting adult use to launch in 2024, and so they're focusing on optimizing their medical operations in the state. And so what the main reasons for that focus is threefold. The Virginia legislature made major changes to the state medical cannabis program this year, including streamlining patient applications so consumers can buy products the same day they receive a doctor's recommendation. This is expected to increase demand. The medical program continues to ramp up, and there's plenty of infrastructure to build before the recreational cannabis market begins. While the legislature failed this year to reenact 2 bills needed to launch the adult use cannabis market in January 2024. This means companies such as Jushi can count only on medical cannabis sales for the foreseeable future. And so again, seems like unfortunate delays out of the legislature. And so just to scroll down to the bottom to highlight again, what happens when you decriminalize but you don't launch an adult use program? In the absence of a state-regulated market to serve consumer demand, Padini said, the illicit market has begun to flourish. What do you know? That's the consequence of not launching an adult use program. Since adult use possession and consumption, but not sales, were legalized last year. And so this is the same issue we're seeing in New York and a lot of states that are championing decriminalization, but not realizing that ultimately just helps organized crime when you don't launch a legal adult use program to properly supply that legal demand. As Bedini added, it throws a wrench into the works because of many of those illegal businesses are selling cannabis goods of questionable quality, which could lead to public health issues, highlighting why the current status quo is in fact more dangerous to public health than legalizing and launching adult use programs to legally supply the demand. As pop-ups are definitely a thing, they weren't before, but they are now. People see these things, these stores that call themselves dispensaries, and they go in and buy these completely unregulated products, and everyone knows unregulated products are a threat to consumer health. And that is why, obviously, if the public health is in your best interest, you would want to legalize cannabis a long time ago and launch recreational adult use programs and try to make it harder for people to get access to tobacco and alcohol, if anything was for public health. But regardless, on to some more state news. As Tom Angell reports, unfortunately, just in Nebraska's Secretary of State announced that activists failed to collect enough valid signatures to qualify 2 medical cannabis ballot initiatives for the November ballot. And so while this is very unfortunate, the good news is that after this news, this came out as of yesterday, Nebraska lawmaker plans bill to legalize medical cannabis. So to offset that news, we do at least have this press release. So it seems like this was kind of planned, but Nebraska lawmaker from Omaha is promising to introduce a bill to legalize medical cannabis in the state after similar measures failed to collect enough valid signatures to appear on the November ballot. Senator Jain said in a news release Tuesday that she will introduce legislation in the upcoming legislative session slated to begin January 4th. Now, obviously, introducing is different than passing it and actually getting it approved, but we just like to see this effort since that ballot initiative went to waste, unfortunately. So we will exhaust every possible measure to get Nebraskans the medical freedom they deserve and want after, unfortunately, they did not get the 87,000 signatures. But they were anticipating that. And so Nebraska was one of the smaller states with medical only that we were hoping would get on the ballot. But hopefully this effort will replace that next year. And so with that, though, Tom Angell highlights that new cannabis prohibitionists have filed legal challenges that seek to prevent Missouri and Arkansas voters from having a chance to legalize cannabis in November. And so we got another pathetic last-ditch effort by these loser prohibitionists trying to thwart the will of the American people yet again by exercising the only option they have left, which is paying to keep the status quo alive. So pretty pathetic, but nonetheless, they seem to forget that this country is a democracy, a government by and for the people, and the people of America are supposed to decide. And so while while this is the only option they have left because everything else that they claim is based on lies, legalization opponents have increasingly relied on courts to block voters' popular will. And so let's just hope that these judges are not as corrupted as the politicians in Congress, and they might rule for the American people as opposed to ruling for dark money groups that likely fund these Learn About Sam, advocacy groups, smart approaches to cannabis, which is likely funded by big tobacco, big alcohol, the same groups that pay Schumer to delay SAFE so that they can allow the big MSOs to get as big as possible and then try and swoop in and buy them in the future. So while I may have gone off on some speculating there, back to the facts, as Hirsh Jain does share that the deeply anti-democratic character of the cannabis prohibition movement, already well known, would be perfectly crystallized by efforts to invalidate duly qualified legalization initiatives in Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. And he says to be determined, but seems likely. So we don't know how this is going to play out. Let's again hope for the will of the American people will win out, besides these unfortunate, annoying groups that have money and want to keep the status quo alive. But just wanted to share some interesting findings. This one article is from OklahomaWatch.org, and then this other article, the Arkansas Secretary of State said the number of signatures for the legalization initiative was by far the biggest that any of our staff has ever seen, but the initiative will probably be tossed based on an absurd technicality. Wild. So I'm going to put these links to these articles from Arkansas Times and from OklahomaWatch.org in the description below, but just note that there's no specific article on Missouri. And I think it's worth considering that Missouri and Maryland will likely be on the ballots as well. It seems like they're ahead of some of these other states like Arkansas and Oklahoma. And so I would still consider, if the prohibitionists are able to get Arkansas and Oklahoma off the ballot, yet we can still get Missouri and Maryland through, I think that'll still be a big win for cannabis. And so I don't know if there's anything more that I wanted to go through this last bit. Don't need a tinfoil hat to say that the political class and powerful industries in the U.S. are engaged in a campaign to combat popular will and maintain cannabis prohibition, which better suits their economic and political interests, not ours. And that's why we got to continue this fight. And so their main tools are the media and the courts, and that's what I try to expose as best as possible, and I'm sure you see the same thing. So all we can do is keep our head up, keep fighting, and trust that the truth will win out in the end. And so with that, on to some MSO news. As Sayshu Medicherla shares Air Wellness' second quarter 2022 earnings and his takeaways. And so while these were more disappointing than expected, mostly because Air Wellness did not get the approval at the same time of the other MSOs in New Jersey, I have no doubt that they will be able to pick up their growth in the second half of the year. But of course, we do want to see these MSOs cash flowing from operations sooner than later. But you can pause to read from 1 down to 3, where it ends at steep cut. Then you can pause to read from 4 all the way down to BS starting to get hairy, but you know, when things change, all you can really do is adapt accordingly. And then from 8 down to get more efficient cultivation operations, you can pause to read. And then lastly, from 11 down to end, you can pause to read as well. So thank you, Sayshu, for that, so I can share with my audience. You can grab the link below if you wanted to read through that. Well, we've got ArizonaCannabis.com sharing that Arizona to get new cannabis flower and extract brand in September. And so I do believe I shared a story about this recently in a press release from Verano when they announced that their brand is going to be making its way to the West Coast. But more information on their brand if you wanted to read, as Savvy will be available in Move and Zenleaf dispensaries beginning September 2022, followed by additional third-party retail locations across 6 core markets, not just Arizona, but Illinois, Massachusetts, Maryland, Nevada, and Ohio, with additional launches planned in the future for New Jersey and Pennsylvania as well. So good job, Verano, continuing to expand. Well, apparently, reported by New Cannabis Ventures, TerrAscend closes the $28.5 million Michigan cannabis dispensaries acquisition. And so while Michigan is a very competitive, unlimited license market, and so while we're seeing major price compression, clearly TerrAscend does seem to see the benefit of continuing to acquire dispensaries and outlets to sell legal cannabis in the state regardless. And so the accretive acquisition of 5 high-performing dispensaries expands TerrAscend's retail footprint to 17 in Michigan alone and 32 nationwide. But the main thing I think for TerrAscend, why this is a big victory for them, the acquisition includes 6 dispensary licenses, 5 of which are currently operational and located in the cities of Addison, Buchanan, Camden, Edmore, and Morancini. So to think, 6 dispensaries, 5 operational ones for just $28.5 million. What a steal! And so this is the steal. These are the deals you can get when obviously the market has bottomed. The addition of Pinnacle expands TerrAscend's retail footprint to 17 in Michigan and 32 nationwide. And so more information if you wanted to grab the link below. But on international news, or not international news yet, last of the MSOs, so thanks Puff Daddy for sharing, but apparently MSOs, MSOS, the ETF, and MSOs are making another appearance on Wall Street Bets. And so I'll put this link below if you wanted to read through it. But obviously the more awareness we can get for these cannabis companies, especially how undervalued they are at these current valuations based on the growth that they're going to see in the coming years. Obviously, if we can get the power of Wall Street Bets behind this, that would be amazing going forward. And so with that, a few other stories. Puff Daddy shares this one. It is behind a paywall from Forbes, but highlighting that Switzerland is expected to launch Europe's first cannabis sales pilot program. And when I did click on it, I did see that I think they're planning to launch it September 15th. So this will proceed to launch in the next month, which is great to see. Another European country take initiative. And while I don't believe that Switzerland has ended cannabis prohibition yet, as this is a pilot program to study the effects of cannabis legalization, they have to look no further than Canada and legal U.S. states to get the data to tell them that it's the smart thing to do sooner than later to just end prohibition. But regardless, good to see Switzerland taking steps in the right direction. Well, we've also got this one from Tom Blickman. Thanks, Tom Blickman, for sharing this update out of Germany, because while all signs do point towards legalization, which is great, as the legislation is being written up by the end of this year to be passed by next year to become law and launched in 2024, but a cannabis consumer gets caught every 3 minutes. This is why activists are calling for the decriminalization of cannabis consumption as a first step, something provided for the UN conventions. And so while this would be a good thing to stop people being arrested from simple cannabis possession, I think a better approach would just be to tell law enforcement to stop arresting anyone for simple cannabis possession, because the one other side effect that we do see from decriminalization and making cannabis no longer illegal is that it allows black markets and organized crime groups to thrive, because no one is legally supplying the demand, and so therefore they step in and they take the risk, because the reward is usually greater than the risk, as long as police aren't enforcing this sort of stuff. And so just wanted to share this. You can grab the link below if you're interested in reading more, but nonetheless, Germany is on track to legalizing. Would just be interesting to see what they do from now until then, but all we can really hope for is no delays, and that Germany can get this legislation done by the end of this year, pass it by next year, and then see this market launch in 2024. And so lastly, this one comes from Market Watch, so take it with a grain of salt, but these cannabis stocks could benefit from adult use cannabis legalization in Germany, as Germany is much closer to legalizing adult use cannabis than the US experts say. Of course, because at the federal level, we're not expecting cannabis to be legalized. That is all just, the headline games that the media likes to play. We know that if anything is going to happen, it's going to be some incremental safe plus. But nonetheless, if you wanted to take advantage of the German opportunity in the coming years, it seems like they're referencing Pablo Zuanic from Cantor Fitzgerald. But main thing that they highlighted of this is Aurora and Tilray, which currently have production facilities in Germany to supply the medical cannabis market there. Zuanic pointed out, with uncertainty on the reform outlook for cannabis in the U.S., we suggest investors pay attention to Germany, as legalization there could result in significant upside for a few NASDAQ-listed cannabis stocks, Zuanic said. And of course, Aurora and Tilray, being Canadian LPs, have the benefit of being listed on major U.S. exchanges. But he also said U.S. multi-state cannabis operators such as Curaleaf could also get a boost, with consolidation probably accelerating in the lead up to a recreational market. So that's all I'm going to touch on, but you can grab the link below if you wanted to read more. And then so lastly, just to share where we sit today, this one comes from Harrison Brecken Law Firm. Elections 2022, cannabis ballot measures. And so obviously as time goes on, we do see how much more corrupt and how much more difficult ending cannabis prohibition has been than we would have thought, especially what I would have thought years back before even starting this channel. So just want to read this out, because it is a well-written piece, a word on cannabis ballot measures. I'm a little sour on late-stage cannabis ballot measures. One reason is that most of the 21 states that allow citizen-initiated ballot initiatives already have made their runs at cannabis. What's left is less impactful change in trailing jurisdictions. A second reason is that many cannabis initiatives are poorly designed, often due to questionable motives. Example, brought by for-profit actors, or to forestall meaningful reform. A third reason, and perhaps most significant, is the recent anti-democratic spate of wins enjoyed by prohibitionist officials and special interest groups. The most pathetic of all. These parties have templatized overturning successful cannabis and other progressive initiative votes via obscure process-type challenges. See, cannabis ballot measures are a sucker's game, notes from South Dakota, Mississippi, Nebraska, and Florida. And we could see Arkansas and Oklahoma be the next victims of this. Hopefully that won't be the case. But this sinister development, in turn, has placed constraints on what certain initiative sponsors even set out to achieve. See South Dakota. So despite all that, organizers continue to push forward. Thank you, organizers, because you are what's going to make this actually happen in time. Some of the cannabis initiatives are on track for November votes, and some will find voter approval. You have to tip your hat. What happens once courts and legislature get a hold of them before November or after the fact is anybody's guess. But again, I think what we can hope for the most is that Maryland and Missouri, two states with large successful medical programs and large populations, as long as they win on the ballot this election, then cannabis will still win. But just to highlight all of the initiatives, Arkansas, you can pause to read to learn more about what they're fighting for. Maryland, you can pause to read to learn more about all of their initiatives. Missouri, you can pause to read to learn all about their initiatives. Nebraska, unfortunately, they did not get on there. While North Dakota and Oklahoma, you can pause to read more about theirs. Well, South Dakota is trying again after voting to legalize on the ballot in 2020, but then the governor stepped in and was like, yeah, no, I know better than all of you. And so while they're trying to get it on the ballot again, hopefully the governor doesn't step in and ruin that. But these are all the efforts that we are looking forward to in November. And so hopefully, the truth can win in the end, and the will of the people will withstand these efforts from prohibitionist groups. But just wanted to share this as the last one before we head out. And that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you got some value out of today's video. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address that. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody.